Western background, ek tanha cowboy ka introduction, uski zindagi, log uski bear mi kiasakti, or uska past. Ek choti dusty talmi uski entry, jahan log gossip or judgment kardi hain ek orit ko bear mi jo town ki nazran mi perfect nahi. Cowboy cause orit esi pali dofamulakat, log usi kate hain kuo, virgin nahi high, uski past life high, magar cowboy ko fark nahi pata. Tension build up. Society could judgment or cowboy could dil could beach contrast. The days in Dry Creek fell into a quiet rhythm, but for Caleb Hart, nothing about them felt ordinary anymore. Each morning, he found himself noticing small details about Lila Grant, the way her brow furrowed when she was deep in thought, the way she hummed absent-mindedly while sweeping the porch, or how she always kept her chin high, even when women in the street looked her way with eyes sharpened like knives. Caleb wasn't a man given to much conversation, but he knew when silence spoke louder than words. And in Lila's silence, he heard stories she hadn't yet told. One evening, the air thick with the scent of summer rain, Caleb found her sitting alone outside the boarding house. The storm had passed, leaving the sky streaked with crimson, but her gaze was far away, lost beyond the horizon. He tipped his hat and settled on the steps beside her, a respectful distance between them. "You ever get tired of it?" he asked softly. She glanced at him, puzzled. Of what? The stares. The whispers. Folks thinkin' they know your life better than you do. Lila's lips pressed together, and for a moment he thought she wouldn't answer. But then she let out a bitter laugh, low and sharp. "Tired of it? I stopped being tired years ago. Now I just endure it." Caleb didn't push. He let the silence stretch, the cicadas buzzing in the warm air. Finally, she drew a shaky breath. "You've heard what they say about me." "I've heard plenty," Caleb admitted. "Don't mean I believe a word of it." Her head turned sharply, eyes flashing. "And why not? Most men do." Caleb leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Because I know the kind of men who talk like that. And I know they ain't saints themselves. Takes a certain type of coward to drag a woman's name through the mud just to feel taller." Her expression softened at his words, but the hurt lingered. She looked down at her hands, twisting them in her lap. "I was engaged once," she began quietly. "His name was Daniel. He was a rancher's son, handsome, charming, the kind everyone said I'd be lucky to have. And for a while I thought I was." Her voice wavered, but she forced herself on. "We planned the wedding, right down to the dress. But one night he pressed me for more. I was young, naive, and I gave him what he asked. Afterward, he told me I was ruined, that no decent man would want me now. A week later, he broke the engagement. He made sure the story spread before I even had a chance to breathe." Her words hung heavy in the twilight. Caleb's jaw tightened, his hand curling into a fist against his thigh. He could picture the kind of boy Daniel must have been, spoiled, smug, and cruel enough to wound someone just to protect his own pride. Lila continued, her voice steadier now. "It didn't matter that he'd been the one to take what he claimed he wanted. It didn't matter that he'd promised me forever. All anyone cared about was that I wasn't a virgin anymore. To them, that made me less of a woman, less of a person. My father tried to defend me, but the whispers never stopped. And when he passed, I was left alone with nothing but their pity and their scorn." Caleb said nothing for a long time. He stared out at the fading light, his chest heavy with a mix of anger and sorrow. Then slowly he turned to her. "Lila," he said, his voice rough, "that boy wasn't worth the dirt on your boots. A man who judges a woman's worth by something so small, he don't know the first thing about love or honor." Her eyes shimmered, but she blinked the tears back. "Easy words, Caleb, but they don't change the truth. Around here, a woman is measured by what she can offer a man. And I've already failed." Caleb's gaze locked on hers, steady and unyielding. "You listened to me. You didn't fail. They failed you. And I don't give a damn about what they whisper or how they measure. I ain't looking for untouched innocence. I'm looking for truth. For someone real. And that's what you are." The conviction in his tone startled her. For years, she had braced herself against mockery, pity, and empty platitudes. But Caleb's words were different, firm, grounded, as though carved into stone. A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft chirp of crickets. At last, Lila let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not as the town saw her, not as Daniel had left her, but as herself. In the days that followed, Caleb's presence became a quiet shield against the cruelty of Dry Creek. When men snickered in the saloon, he silenced them with nothing more than a hard stare. When women sneered as Lila walked by, his steady stride at her side forced them to look away. He never made a show of it, never declared his intentions aloud, but his loyalty was clear. And little by little, Lila began to lower the walls she had built. She laughed more often, though softly, as if afraid it might be taken from her. She spoke freely with Caleb, telling him about her mother's garden that once bloomed with wild roses, about the books she used to read by candlelight, about dreams she had long ago buried. Caleb listened, always patient, never pressing, as if each word she shared was a gift. But not everyone in Dry Creek was content to let things lie. One night, as Caleb was stabling his horse, he found himself confronted by a tall, broad-shouldered man with a cruel smile. The stranger leaned against the stall, arms crossed, blocking his way. "You must be the drifter makin' eyes at Lila Grant," the man drawled. "Funny thing, you ain't the first. And you won't be the last." Caleb's hand stilled on the bridle strap, his gaze narrowing. "And you'd be?" "Name's Roy Barker," the man said proudly. "I was keeping her company before she decided she was too good for me. She thinks you're different, but trust me, give it time, and you'll see she ain't worth the trouble." The smirk on Roy's face was enough to spark a storm in Caleb's chest. But instead of swinging his fist, Caleb straightened slowly, his voice cold as steel. "Far as I can tell, the only trouble around here is men like you. You think a woman's worth is something you get to decide. But let me set you straight. I make my own judgments. And Lila Grant is worth more than you'll ever understand." Roy's grin faltered, but before he could reply, Caleb stepped forward, close enough that his shadow swallowed the man whole. "Now, I suggest you move along before I forget myself." Roy hesitated, then spat on the dirt and stalked off, muttering under his breath. Caleb watched him go, his pulse steady. He had made his choice clear, not just to Roy, but to anyone who had come sniffing around. And as he turned back to the boarding house that night, he realized something he hadn't expected. He wasn't just protecting Lila from the town anymore. He was protecting the fragile hope she was starting to feel. And that hope mattered more to him than his own peace. For the first time in years, Caleb Hart wasn't just a drifter passing through. He had a reason to stay. The tension in Dry Creek was like the summer heat, thick, suffocating, impossible to ignore. The more time Caleb spent with Lila, the louder the whispers grew. Folks didn't like what they couldn't control, and nothing stirred tongues faster than a man openly standing beside a woman the town had already condemned. Women muttered behind gloved hands when Lila walked past, their gazes sharp as glass. Men at the saloon smirked and made crude jokes the moment Caleb's back was turned. Even a preacher, a pale man with a voice like dust, stopped Caleb on the street one Sunday. "You ought to consider your reputation, Mr. Hart," he warned. A God-fearing man wouldn't tie himself to a woman with such history. Caleb had stared him down, his jaw set. "Far as I can tell, preacher, her history's cleaner than most men's souls in this town, including yours." Word spread quickly after that. Some called him a fool, others called him bewitched. But Caleb didn't flinch. He had lived long enough to know when a fight was worth having, and for the first time in years, he was willing to plant his boots in one place and stand his ground. For Lila, it was harder. She had spent years building walls to survive the cruelty of Dry Creek, and now, with Caleb at her side, those walls were crumbling. It frightened her. Every cruel word seemed sharper now, because she had more to lose. And deep down, she feared Caleb might tire of defending her. That one day, he might believe the whispers after all. That fear came to a head one sweltering afternoon. Lila had gone to the market for supplies. The street was crowded, the heat making tempers short. As she moved through the stalls, she heard the familiar hiss of voices behind her. Look at her, strutting around like she's decent. Cowboy must be blind or desperate. Won't be long before he leaves her like the rest. She kept her chin high, ignoring them, but the sting was sharper than ever. And then Roy Barker stepped out from the crowd, blocking her path. Well now, he drawled loudly so everyone nearby could hear. If it ain't Dry Creek's favorite charity case. Tell me, Lila, how long you reckon before your new cowboy gets wise and moves on? The market stilled. Dozens of eyes turned to her, waiting to see if she would shrink, if she would crumble. But before she could answer, a familiar voice cut through the silence. Funny thing, Barker, Caleb said, stepping forward, his spurs clicking against the dirt. I was just thinking the same thing about you. Roy's smirk faltered as Caleb came to stand beside Lila, his presence filling the space. His voice was calm, but it carried like thunder. Seems to me you spend a fair bit of time running your mouth about a woman who wants nothing to do with you. That tells me one thing. You're the one who can't let go. A ripple of laughter ran through the crowd, but Roy's face darkened. You don't know her like I do, he spat. She ain't worth it. Caleb's eyes blazed, and his voice dropped low, every word deliberate. Worth it? She's worth more than every man here who ever dared speak her name with anything less than respect. And I'll tell you plain, I didn't come to this town looking for a virgin or some saint carved out of stone. I came looking for the woman herself, and I found her. That's all that matters to me. The street fell silent. His words hung in the air, heavy as iron. People shifted uncomfortably, some looking away, others whispering. Lila's heart pounded in her chest, her breath caught between fear and awe. Roy opened his mouth to retort, but Caleb stepped closer, his shadow looming. Now, you've had your say, Barker. But if I hear her name off your tongue again, I'll make sure it's the last time you speak it. Roy glared, but the look in Caleb's eyes made him think better of it. With a curse, he shoved his way through the crowd and stormed off. Slowly, the market resumed its bustle, though quieter now, the weight of Caleb's declaration still pressing over them all. Lila stood frozen, her hands trembling at her sides. Caleb turned to her, his expression softening. You all right? She swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, he said firmly. And I'd do it again. For the first time, something inside her shifted. The years of shame, of carrying a burden that had never been hers to bear, cracked under the force of his words. And in their place bloomed something new, something she hadn't dared to feel in a long time. Hope. That evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Lila found Caleb on the porch, whittling a piece of wood with his pocket knife. She stood before him, her hands twisting in her apron, her heart hammering. You don't understand, she said softly. All these years, I believed them. Believed I wasn't enough. That no man could ever look at me without seeing what I'd lost. Caleb set down the knife and looked up at her, his eyes steady, unwavering. I don't see what you lost, Lila. I see what you are. Strong. Brave. Beautiful. And I don't give a damn about the rest. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but this time she didn't hide them. She let them fall, raw and unguarded, because for once, they weren't born of shame. They were born of release. Caleb rose to his feet, closing the space between them. He reached out, his calloused hand brushing away a tear with surprising gentleness. You've spent too long letting others define your worth. Don't you see? You're already more than enough. Her breath caught, and for a moment the world seemed to still. And then, with a courage she hadn't known she possessed, Lila leaned into him. His arms closed around her, solid and sure, and for the first time in years, she felt safe. Truly safe. From that day on, things in Dry Creek began to shift. Not quickly, and not without resistance, but slowly. People still whispered, of course, they always would, but the edge had dulled. Caleb's defiance had drawn a line, and most were too wary to cross it. Those who still dared were met with his unflinching gaze, and soon even they learned to hold their tongues. For Lila, it was more than just the town's silence. It was the knowledge that she no longer carried her burden alone. Caleb's love was steady, unwavering, untainted by the past. It gave her the strength to reclaim herself, not the woman they had tried to define, but the woman she truly was. And for Caleb Hart, the drifter who had never planted roots, Dry Creek was no longer just another town on the map. It was home. Because home wasn't land or buildings or the weight of a name. Home was the woman who stood beside him, unashamed, unbroken, wholly herself. And she was worth everything.